The rope pressed into his neck. His pulse didn't spike. It slowed. This was the moment he had been working toward for most of his life. Not freedom. Not forgiveness. Execution. Carl Panzram didn't commit violence to escape prison. He committed violence to make sure the state would eventually kill him. And for 22 years, it refused. Not because he deserved mercy, but because deciding when a man dies is power. And power was the one thing he could never control. When the trapdoor opened, something unsettling happened. He finally got what he wanted, which means his execution may have been the only victory of his life. And if that's true, then the question isn't whether justice was served. The question is, did we give him exactly what he spent his life trying to take? I wish all mankind had one neck and I had my hands on it. He didn't scream those words. He wrote them calmly, deliberately, without hesitation. There is something more disturbing than rage. Precision. Carl Panzram did not hide his evil. He refined it. Most killers distort their stories. They blame childhood. They blame society. They blame madness. Panzram rejected all of it. No excuses. No explanations. No appeals for understanding. He did not say, "This is what made me." He said, in essence, "This is what I am." He stripped himself of nuance. Nuance implies conflict. Conflict implies doubt. Doubt implies weakness. And weakness was unacceptable. In his writings, he was not chaotic. He was structured, consistent, almost disciplined. Each crime was not a loss of control. It was a declaration. Each confession was not remorse. It was reinforcement. He was building something. An image that could not be softened. A personality that could not be rehabilitated. A man impossible to redeem. Prison systems are designed around a premise. That behavior can be corrected. That time can erode violence. That structure can produce reform. Panzram refused the premise. He did not adapt. He did not negotiate. He did not perform remorse. Instead, he amplified himself. If they called him dangerous, he became more dangerous. If they called him irredeemable, he embraced the word. He understood something simple. The system can manage criminals. It struggles with absolutes. And Panzram was determined to become an absolute. Not misunderstood, not broken, not reformable, unfixable. He rejected psychology before it could reach him. Rejected sympathy before it could weaken him. Rejected redemption before it could claim him. Because redemption would mean surrender. And surrender meant allowing someone else to define him. So he defined himself first. Through violence. Through confession. Through defiance. But here's where the pattern becomes unsettling. He wasn't trying to survive prison. He wasn't maneuvering for release. He wasn't building a case for mercy. He was escalating. Each act pushing him closer to a single, irreversible outcome. Execution. The more monstrous he became, the narrower his future. As if he were deliberately collapsing his own possibilities. As if you were forcing the state into a corner. You can cage a man. You can isolate him. You can attempt to reform him. But what do you do with someone who refuses all three? What do you do with the man who will not be corrected? Who insists on becoming the worst version of himself? Who appears to be steering, consciously, toward the gallows? That is the question that lingers. Not why he hated, but why he needed that hatred to be permanent. Why becoming unsavable mattered so much. and why death, not freedom, seemed to be the only acceptable ending. Because if a man eliminates every path except execution, was he self-destructing? Or was he constructing something very specific? Something final? Something he intended to control? Before we go any further, understand this. Karl Panzram was not hinting at darkness. He was recording it. Between 1899 and his final arrest, he claimed responsibility for 21 murders. He traveled across multiple states, worked as a laborer, a drifter, a thief, leaving behind assaults, arson, and bodies. But what unsettles historians isn't only the violence, it's the tone. In his autobiography, he wrote, "I have murdered 21 human beings. I have committed sodomy on more than 1,000 male human beings." No hesitation. No qualifiers. No attempt to soften the language. He continued, "I have robbed thousands of them and burned many buildings." Then, almost clinically, "For all these things, I am not in the least bit sorry." In one account, he described luring a man to a remote lake, striking him, holding him underwater, and then simply stating, "I watched him sink, and that was the end of him." No dramatics. No emotional distortion. Just conclusion. Whether every number was exact is debated. But that's not the core issue. What matters is intent. He wanted the record to be absolute. He wanted the image to be sealed. Not misunderstood. Not traumatized. Not diagnosable. Deliberate. He did not want mitigation. He did not want context. He wanted finality. Every confession reinforced the same message: I am beyond reform. And that distinction changes the entire dynamic. Because once a man insists on being unsalvageable, the system has only two options: correct him or eliminate him. And what happens when correction is refused? When explanation is rejected? When a man escalates not to survive, but to ensure there is no path back? That's when the conflict stops being about crime and starts being about control. A will against a will. A man determined to become irredeemable. And a state determined to decide how and when that irredeemability ends. And that's where the real tension begins. The sentence did not come quickly. There were papers, signatures, deliberations, transfers between facilities, appeals filed, appeals reviewed, appeals postponed. The machinery of the state does not move with emotion. It moves with procedure. Karl Panzram waited. Not nervously, not regretfully, but impatiently. He had stripped himself of redemption, made himself irredeemable, collapsed every possible path except one: execution. And yet the system hesitated. Not to spare him, to process him. The state does not rush toward death. It schedules it. It calculates it. It owns it. And ownership was the problem. Because deciding when a man dies is power. Absolute power. You can cage a body. You can restrict movement. You can silence speech. But the final authority, the moment of ending, belongs to the state. Not to the prisoner. Panzram could endure isolation. He could endure labor. He could endure violence. What he could not endure was suspension. Day after day, he remained alive. Alive on someone else's timeline. Each sunrise was not relief. It was delay. Each administrative postponement was not mercy. It was denial. He had shaped himself into something the system could not reform. So why would it not finish the process? Why keep him breathing? The longer they kept him alive, the more the dynamic shifted. Execution would have been final. Waiting was erosion. Slow, controlled, unavoidable. The prison did not need to break him physically. Time did the work. And time was not his to command. That may have been the deepest punishment. Not the cell, not the chains, but the knowledge that his ending was no longer his own. He had engineered monstrosity as leverage, escalated violence as pressure, confessed without remorse, provoked without restraint. He was pushing the state toward the gallows. But the state refused to be pushed. It absorbed him instead, filled him, cataloged him, contained him, and by doing so, it made a quiet statement. You do not decide when this ends. We do. For a man obsessed with control, even if that control meant orchestrating his own destruction, this was intolerable. He did not fear death. He feared irrelevance. He feared becoming just another inmate suspended in bureaucratic limbo. Execution would have been an event. Waiting turned him into a case number. The rope would have been decisive. Paperwork was humiliating. And so the question becomes uncomfortable. If a man demands death and the state refuses, at what point does preservation become domination? At what point does maintaining life become a form of restraint more severe than death itself? The system believed it was administering justice. But from his perspective, it was withholding the only outcome he could claim as his own. He wanted finality. They gave him postponement. He wanted impact. They gave him procedure. And in that slow suffocation of time, something far more unsettling emerges. Was the state punishing him? Or was it protecting its monopoly on power? Because as long as he was alive, he was not in control, and that may have been the one condition he could never accept. It is easy to assume he wanted to die because he was tired, because prison broke him, because isolation crushed him, because guilt finally caught up. But nothing in his words suggests exhaustion. Nothing suggests collapse. He did not sound defeated. He sounded resolved. Karl Panzram did not beg for death as relief. He demanded it as a decision. There is a difference. Relief comes from pain. A decision comes from control. And control was the only thing he still valued. As long as he was alive, something dangerous remained possible. Change. A psychologist could interpret him. A guard could humanize him. Time could soften him. A single moment of regret could fracture the image he had built so carefully. And that image mattered. He had constructed himself into something rigid, unapologetic, unfixable, permanent. If he lived long enough, the system would keep trying to explain him, trying to categorize him, trying to reduce him to trauma and pathology. But explanation diminishes absolutes. Understanding weakens myth. And Panzram refused to become understandable. He refused to be improved. Because improvement implies that something was wrong. And admitting something was wrong would mean surrendering the identity he had chosen. Living meant risk. Risk of erosion. Risk of nuance. Risk of becoming smaller than the monster he insisted on being. Death removed that risk. Death freezes identity. No therapy can touch a dead man. No reform can reshape him. No late confession can rewrite him. The narrative stops. And it stops exactly where he leaves it. That is power. As long as he breathed, the state had time. Time to attempt correction. Time to apply pressure. Time to wear him down. If he had lived long enough, perhaps the edges would have dulled. Perhaps the hatred would have thinned. Perhaps he would have been remembered as a case study instead of a force. He would have become manageable. And if he became manageable, the system would have won. But if he died unaltered, if he died defiant, if he died exactly as he declared himself, then he denied them that transformation. He denied them the slow victory of reform. He denied them the satisfaction of improvement. He forced the ending, not as escape, as preservation. Preservation of the one thing he refused to surrender: authorship. Because as long as someone else held the timeline, they held the story. And he could not allow that. So the death sentence became more than punishment. It became a boundary, a line beyond which no one could reshape him. He did not want to be saved. He wanted to remain untouched. And in a system built on correction, that refusal is the most radical act of all. So the question shifts. Was he running from life? Or was he protecting the only version of himself he would ever accept? If he had lived, the system would have won. If he died on his terms, he would. And that possibility is what makes his execution feel less like an ending and more like a decision. The rope tightened, not around a broken man, around a consistent one. The chamber was quiet. No spectacle. No trembling plea. No collapse. 22 years of waiting came to an end. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not explain himself. When asked for his final words, he didn't soften. He reportedly snapped, "Hurry it up!" No confession. No last-minute humanity. The hood was lowered. The knot adjusted. The trap door set. For decades, the state had controlled the timeline. Each delay had been deliberate. Each postponement, a reminder of who held authority. Now the authority acted. The lever was pulled. The body dropped. And just like that, the process stopped. No rehabilitation. No psychological breakthrough. No erosion of the persona he had built. No future contradiction. His identity froze exactly where he left it. Unapologetic. Unaltered. That's where the discomfort settles. Justice is supposed to restore balance. But this didn't feel like restoration. It felt like termination. If he had lived, time would have kept working. Time softens edges. Time introduces doubt. Time creates the possibility of change. Maybe he would have changed. Maybe he wouldn't have. We'll never know. Death removed that question. It ended the attempt. It ended the struggle over who controlled the narrative. The rope tightened. The body stilled. The file closed. And for the first time in decades, there was no next move. Some men spend their last breath asking to live. Carl Panzram spent his asking to die. When the state finally gave him what he wanted, there was nothing left to argue. No appeal. No future. Just a body at the end of a rope.